I'm on my way to the hospital that I've been working with the last couple of weeks. I walk the short distance from my house with a fast pace and a firm face. We have severe problems to handle. First of all, we are serving so little patients that we can't even pay our own bills and our salaries. Secondly, the salaries that we do pay is actually below the minimum standard of the city, which is illegal. And thirdly, and maybe most pressing, is that the operational permit for running a hospital has been out for a year. So the hospital is actually operating on some kind of probation. I've been out of town for a week, so I'm really looking forward to see the progress of these items. And also I want to check in on the big renovation project that they've started. As I enter the lobby, I'm hit by a stench of mold and moist. I see a number of buckets standing on the floor collecting water dripping down from the second floor. And I look up the walls and I see big stains of mold in the roof. That's actually our X-ray machine right over there with a big bucket picking up water dripping down. I stop in my step. How can there be water coming from the second floor? I rush outside again and I see this. What's missing from this picture? There's no roof. They've taken off the roof, but they didn't put anything back on again. And there's been heavy rains the last week in Bandung, which is the city where this story takes place. I hurry back in again and I see more and more disturbing signs of problems. Water is dripping down every wall into our pharmacy. Even Jesus has mold on him. I sprint up to the second floor and I'm greeted by this sight. The roof has practically fallen in and created a big mush of mold and debris that just soaking in water for a week. The stench is unbearable. I also now realize that I'm actually the first person from the hospital up here. They don't know yet about the disaster. The part affected of the disaster constitutes about 60% of the beds we have in the hospital. And we are still treating outpatients below this area. The sight is just too much for me, and in this room over here I fall to my knees and tears starts to fall down my face. All we could do was start to dig. I was in these exact clothes at the time, and we started to dig. We had no shovels even, so we started to dig with our bare hands. But in the back of my head, a single thought went on, and that was the thought, this hospital is dead. There's no recovery from this. Welcome. This is the story about how a hospital that had no roof, no patients, no valid permit, no money, and no leadership strategy became a profitable certified hospital with full service, lots of patients, and using a hypothesis-driven business strategy approach in just 1.5 years. And the driver behind this remarkable transformation was Kanban. And I was lucky enough to be part of this together with the wonderful team of the hospital foundation that I was working with and the amazing people in the hospital as well. My name is Marcus Hammarberg. I work for Aptitude, which is a small consultancy in Stockholm as a lean coach and contractor. I have 1 wife, 2 leisure interests, and 3 boys. I've been a developer mainly on the Microsoft platform, but lately also doing some node work. But mostly I'm interested in how to work more effectively together. That led me to check in first agile methods such as Scrum and lately Kanban. And actually you could get that book to a discounted price during the conference. My wife Elin and I, and our 3 boys, we lived and worked for the Salvation Army in Indonesia. We worked for the health foundation there that governs 6 hospitals and 17 clinics throughout Indonesia. My job was to help the hospitals with their strategic plans, but that progressed very slowly. So instead I could focus on the local hospital in the city where I was living. Oh, that was a really crappy picture, sorry about that. And that was really a blessing because we ran into this emergency situation with the hospital there. If you got me started telling this story, I could probably go on for hours or if not days. I realized that when I tried to put this presentation together. So I needed some kind of framework to structure my talk and make it a little bit more concrete. And what a better place to start than the foundational principles and the core practices of Kanban. Together, these forms a really nice structure for my talk, because it turns out that we actually brushed on everything here, sometimes without me even noticing. Using these principles in a very unlikely setting as I was in, as a Western IT guy, I was now in a hospital in Indonesia, I saw and I gained a deeper understanding for what they actually mean in practice. The changes were so big and the situation was so dramatic that it was easy to see them in practice. And I have great use of that now when I'm in a place where maybe the changes are not so dramatic. My goal is that you will be inspired by this tale, and that I will also open your eyes for how these principles can be applied in your world, so that you can use these principles in practice better. If I don't do that, I just hope to entertain you with a story, the true story, and about hardship, perseverance, and how we got out of a disastrous situation. Twice, actually. The first part is really easy to find a principle for, because that's the start where you are principle. This is the first principle of Kanban, and when the roof of a hospital falls in, there's only one thing you can do, right? You have to start digging. So we first needed to secure the working condition for our staff, and mostly, of course, be able to treat patients in the hospital, because it was really a dangerous situation. So we didn't have time to talk about new roles and what we're going to call the processes and stuff like this. This is where we were. We just had to start going at that place. In fact, I realized that I only mentioned Kanban for a very few people in the process during this 1.5 years. This was just, it grew on us, and this was just what I have been taught to do in my IT training. So I just did it. And it just happened to be exactly what this hospital needed. You could ask, how could you not start where you are when the roof of a hospital falls in, right? And for us, we sometimes saw this urge, and it manifested itself in the blame game. Because when the roof of a hospital falls in, the first question that pops in many people's heads is, who's to blame for this? But I'm sorry, that doesn't help us right now. I actually made a not list of things that we were not supposed to talk about in this meeting. And then I told them that once all of this is fixed, we can go back and talk about who's to blame afterwards. But we never got around to doing that. There's an old, bad English joke about a man asking a taxi driver how to get to Piccadilly Circus. And the cabbie says, "Ooh, that's really hard. I would not start from here." Well, I'm sorry, this is where we are. We're right here, right now. Let's improve from this position. I don't care how we got here. We can learn from that, of course, but I just want to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. And then a little bit better next day, and then a little bit better next day. I much rather turn up the good than avoid the bad. Speaking of good places to start, the visualize part is where most teams start, and so did we. And during the 1.5 years, we visualized many things, but I want to relate one story where I got the biggest jaw drop of my life. We decided that even though we had many pressing problems, cash flow was number one priority. So important that we actually worked with it. We started 3 activities to get more patients to come to our hospitals, because right now we could not even pay salaries. It was rumors, and I saw people paying salaries out of their own pockets because we could not afford that. And even other bills, such as medical bills and doctor's bills, was just not being able to pay. So we needed patients fast. However, I felt that it was important that everyone in the hospital understood this, because right now I got the impression that this was like a management problem. And even in that group, not everyone understood the severity of the situation. So I wanted to show them the problem rather than to just talk about it. And most of all, I wanted them to feel that this is important. So I got together with the finance guy of the foundation office, Mr. Anton, and we calculated some really simple financial metrics, like the break-even point. And then we added 10% to get our targets. But considering that this was expressed in Indonesian rupiahs per month, the numbers were, you could not make any sense out of that. So we divided that by 30 to get it by day. And that was good, but it was not actionable for people because it was still too much. The ladies in the laundry of our hospital, they earned 1 million rupees per month. And me trying to get them to understand that it was important that we earned 3 more millions per day, they could not act on that information. It doesn't mean anything to them. So we instead tried to do it a little bit simpler, and we counted number of services that we sold. So you come to the hospital, you meet a doctor, you go to the lab, and you pick up some drugs. That's 3 services sold. And then we just divided the average price of each service sold with our financial data. And we ended up with this target. We need to sell 134 services per day. This is much easier to understand for anyone. Some of these people could actually not even read or write. So they could actually understand this. Our goal was 134. Our average was 70 at the time. So I asked the director of the hospital, Dr. Liljan, to present this in front of the staff. Imagine the shame of having to present this in front of the staff for the first time, transparent like this, and now we made sure that everyone understood it. And the reaction? People didn't care. Someone was doing Facebook. They were talking among each other. Someone was even giggling. And I was really appalled, and I was in shock. How could you not react to this? And in my shock, I asked Mr. Anton, what was the break-even point in number of patients? And he said it was 120. So I drew this line. And I called it the lose money line. And I told the staff, through my bad Indonesian, every day we're below this line, we lost money by having the hospital open. It's not often that you get to hear 70 jaws falling to the floor at the same time. But I got that morning because they actually understood that number. And I learned a lot from that. So what happened here? Well, first of all, this was the first time we were really transparent with the numbers. Secondly, we visualized it and we made it understandable so that everyone could actually understand the data. Lose money. If the hospital is below this line, we lost money that day. And we also started where we were. We told this exactly as we were right now. We didn't paint a picture of what the future would look like. This is where we are right now. And we were doing a lot of averaging, right? We took the average, we divided it by 30 and we took the average price. But it was true enough to communicate the sense that I wanted. They actually felt the urge to change now. We did many more visualizations during the 1.5 years I was there, and we worked out a couple of rules. They were more like guidelines, actually, a little bit like Captain Barbosa. They were not actual rules, but guidelines. And here they are. The first rule is that it needs to be really big. We were having our morning meetings in a big room with the entire staff, so we had to make the presentation of the data really big. Secondly, it has to be easy so that everyone understands it. We focused on learning, so we focused on trends rather than individual numbers. And very important, each visualization needs to have a target so we know where we are aiming. This is where we're going, at least one. And one thing that we found really important also is that it moves fast. We want things that change at least once a week. So we actually found that it was easier to have things that change often, but maybe it was just an indicator of the data we wanted to see than the correct data that only changed maybe once a month. Limit work in process is the principle that not only drives flow, but also innovation. And we use this principle many times in many ways, but I wanted to share a particular instance and maybe in the most unlikely setting you can think of, and where it helped us the most. How do you limit work in process when you rebuild a hospital? Remember the state. The disaster caused about 40 to 50% of our beds unusable. And we went from 55 beds to 24, and our calculations show that we needed maybe 35 to break even. We didn't have any money to rebuild the entire second floor, and we didn't have any time to rebuild the second floor. We needed more beds now. So the first thing we looked into was what we actually had in place today. And it turned out that the room, here's a few of our customers, and it turns out that the room we had were not used to their full capacity. So we could reorganize them quite a lot and actually get up to 32 beds, almost exactly what we needed to break even. And that was really good because that took some of the emergency feel out of the situation. No one had ever looked into this possibility before because the beds were always empty. It's okay to have a big empty room with only one bed. We were not using it. But now the pressure was on and we had to find new ways. So now we could think a little bit not like an emergency and think the situation through. And then we applied the principle of limiting WIP to the renovation itself. This is the entire second floor. I hope you can see it. All of this. That was affected by the disaster. So instead of renovating the entire second floor, we concentrated on this middle part here. And we said, let's just bolt this down and not do these parts on the end and just do this part in the middle. And we could actually do that pretty fast. It took us about 3 to 4 months to do instead of maybe 9 or 12 months even. And it was much less expensive. We could actually pay it with money that we earned, so we didn't have even had to take a loan. And we did the central part only because that where the stairs were, and there was an elevator here, so it was a good access point. Finally, we decided to take down some temporary walls here, and instead of doing 3 rooms with some small room dividers in here, we did 1 big room. We could do that because that was how lower class patients were served there, which is all in alignment with the Salvation Army vision to serve the people in most need. So once that was done, it actually opened up a lot of opportunities for us to be more effective. I want to show you here. There's 4 months between these pictures. This is the day when we cleaned it up, and this is how it looked afterwards. And I'm taking this picture from the nurse desk here, so they could actually monitoring 12 beds all over here, all at the same time, just because we made 1 big open room instead of many smaller rooms like before. When we finished this, we could go back to the places where we had crammed in beds before and just make them in a normal way instead. As it turned out, it was more than a year before we needed these parts. So for more than 1 year, we could actually run with only this, but no one ever looked into that opportunity because the first you thought when the roof fell in, let's fix all of it and do it now. But we applied the principle of limiting work in process and just did that part in the middle, and that saved us a lot of time and a lot of money. Just limiting work in process will cause you some pain. You will find problems in your process. It's the managed flow part where the gain from the WIP pain comes. We never said explicitly that we wanted flow, but it came out of necessity because we needed stuff finished and fixed quickly. Under this heading, you can sort many things that we do in Kanban and in agile practices and stuff like that we can put into that. But the main idea is just to flow ideas to completed things faster. We didn't do anything amazingly different under this heading for the common Western IT guy, but in this context, the changes of introducing some simple practices were profound. For example, we had a daily meeting. Every workplace has a morning prayer every morning. And in that meeting, we showed how we did last day with the data. So you can see Here's the diagram. You can barely see it. Here's the diagram that I showed you before. So in front of the entire staff, we plotted in, this is how we did yesterday. And we also ran a morning meeting with the management staff where we had a simple Kanban board here with the tasks that we were doing. And we showed those tasks in front of the entire staff. So we were really risking our bacon, showing them that we were committed to doing this. Also, after each stand-up, I ran a quick coaching session with the director that was holding the stand-up. And this turned out to be very useful, but also very uncommon in this context. Because what is a coach really? It's an advisor with no formal power. And they had a really hard time to understand, should you act on the things that he says, or should I not, and why, when should I act, and stuff like that. It took a long time for us to clear that cooperation out. But once it stuck, it got really, really good, and I'll tell you about that in the end of the presentation. We stated our policies very, very practical and visual many times on the boards and other visualizations that we did. And that's things that you all know about. That's not particularly interesting. So instead, I want to tell you a story when making policies explicit and Kanban probably saved a life, at least changed it forever. The lady in black here, she's called Ibo Elshi, or Mrs. Elshi for you Westerners. She's the general manager of Rumah Sakit Bungsu, the hospital. And general manager means that she's in charge of everything that is not finance or health. So it's like food supplies, maintenance, laundry, security staff, drivers, you name it. You need anything fixed, you have to go to Ibo Elshi. Now she came to me and my team, and her department was overworked but got nothing done. And that had to do with their priorities constantly being changed. And people got so fed up of waiting, so they went past Ibo Elshi and went directly to her staff, causing even more problems, of course. She spent her days just running around the hospital trying to catch up. And she said to me, I don't want to do that anymore, because the moment I get into a room, I get more work to do. And she was sobbing through that last sentence. And to be quite frank, I felt her pain. She was stressed out, to say the least. I'm talking having problems sitting down on the chair. So my colleague Dina Oli and I, we decided to try to help her a little bit. And our plan was really simple. We wanted to make Ibo Elshi, to help Ibo Elshi to take control over her schedule and the daily tasks. I also noticed one thing just at this point in time, that the management morning meetings has degenerated to be very detailed focused. Rather than to focus on our strategic goals, we talked about some really small details. To resolve this situation, in my role as a coach, I made one of my very few direct decisions. I said, from this point on, we will not talk about maintenance and stuff like that in this meeting. We will let Ibo Elshi decide on stuff like that. And I said, Ibo Elshi, we trust you to do that. And we want you to report back to us on a weekly basis what you have done. This was really a blessing for the management team, because at this point we were discussing the colors of walls in certain rooms and the order of doctors' plaques outside, and even the net to prevent rats from running into our sewers. Details. Step number 2 was to give Ibo Elshi some control over and structure over her daily schedule. So we sat down and made a very detailed schedule for her. You have morning meetings with your staff. After that, you go around in the hospital for 1 hour. We time box that for 1 hour. And if you can't go around the whole hospital, you stop and you continue the next day. And then we allocated 1 hour for slack time, which was unheard of. So this is the time where you can do catch-up work. You do that at this point in time. We also had proper slack with coffee in her schedule. We decided that all work that needs to happen had to go through Ibo Elshi. And we even created a special yellow slip that you had to write your request on and hand to Ibo Elshi. Getting stuff like this to work in Indonesia is really simple. You just ask the manager at the workplace to say that this is the case, and it just happens. Everyone listens to doing that. I suggested to the workers in IBO that they have their morning meetings, only work on 3 things, and then once those three things are done, they come to IBO and she will hand them more things. And when I said that, she looked at me with disbelief, and then she just said, "Can I do that?" Because this had been her situation for a very, very long time. And yes, of course, you can do that. You can limit the number of things that you're working with right now. But she didn't know that. She didn't have the authority. She had all the responsibility, no authority. What's the outcome of all of this then? Already after 3 days, IBO she came to me and she said, "My days are so much calmer now. I don't feel stressed anymore. And my staff love the morning meetings and where we share information and decide on what we're going to do today." Normally in a week, IBO staff got 2 to 3 maintenance things done. And the first report came 1 week late due to a public holiday. So when she reported for the first time, I was expecting that she would give me maybe 6 to 8 things. 10 would be an improvement, right? IBO she reported 46 items completed in 2 weeks. 46 things where they usually did 6. It was the best morning meeting of my life because people were so happy about this improvement. They were laughing in disbelief and they were cheering for everything. Yes, finally we got the AC in our chamber fixed. It took so long that I had to bring out the chair to sit on as a joke. But mostly in the middle of it all stood a new person, IBO. She stood there with confidence and happiness and pride. And I could hear a new voice in her when she talked. She said, "And then my team did this. We also fixed this. Remember that old lamp in the kitchen? Suda, fixed." There's a short video here that I want to show you when she's going through numbers 22 to 26. And I want you to watch the people around her. Remember that this is the staff that they didn't do anything 2 weeks from now. Everyone was complaining at them. Saluran pembuangan air metrik. Renovasi atau pengecatan mawar 3 sudah sempurna. They could not believe what was happening here. So, what happened here really? What did we do that was that made this change happen? Very shortly, we unlocked the potential of IBO. First of all, we moved the authority to the information. That quote is not mine, by the way. It's from the great book Turn the Ship Around by David Marquis. Secondly, we showed her trust, but we asked transparency and we gave her accountability. I think these 3 words work together. Finally, we made the policies very explicit. This is how it's going to work. There's no things outside this, and we limit working process. This also brushes on another of the core principles that I will just mention. During the time here, we didn't fire a single person. We didn't hire any new people. It was just the people in the hospital that made the change. However, we made some roles and responsibilities clearer, and IBO represents one of those times. When the roof falls in, it's really easy to know what to do, right? Because you have no other options. You have to fix that. But things shaped up for us. It shaped up considerably good, actually. Only 2 weeks after we started with our efforts to bring more patients to the hospital, we broke that 120 line for the first time ever. The hospital was not losing money on that day. That was unheard of for years before this. Big cheers, and we celebrated with cake. And then, about 2 months after that, we broke 134 patients. We were actually hitting our target for the first time. No one, including me, thought that we would ever do that. But we did. We celebrated again, and we had cake again. And after 6 months, we were averaging above 120 patients per day. On average, making money every day. And some days were just ridiculously good. I had to bring out a chair for them to stand up to be able to plot that one in. Right? But now the hard work starts. Because what's the goal of a hospital? It's not to make money, right? not the hospitals that I hear about at least. I mean, we need money, but we just need enough money. And could you even say that? What, enough money? Can you? And that concept was just strange to them. And even for me, it felt a little bit strange to say. Also, this is a Salvation Army hospital. Surely we should not be in it to make money, right? So what is it then? Well, we need money, as I said, but maybe it's quality. Some would argue, and maybe I'm one of them, that quality is actually the product of a hospital. That's what you come there for, right? To get quality medical healthcare. Yeah, we could have that, but we could not have that without making money, because if we don't make money, we will not be around. And if we make money and have great quality, but our staff hates to work there, they will leave us. And in the long run, that will not give us any quality anyway. Also, as I said, this is a Salvation Army hospital. Surely there has to be something in there that points to the real reason of the Salvation Army actually having a hospital. Surely we have to have something about pastoral quality. So we ended up to borrow a concept called balanced scorecard. Very loosely, I want to say, mainly just the balanced word. But our idea was that we want to get these 4 areas in balance. We don't want only good quality. We want all of these to balance out. And I can tell you, putting this one up here in Indonesia is really provocative. Me as a non-clergy asking questions about the pastor, that doesn't sit any well. So I ended up borrowing a concept from a book that I recommend to everyone called How to Measure Anything. There's 2 great thought experiments in this book that I used to actually talk about, because a more intangible thing than a pastoral quality I could not think about. So I said, the first thing I said, because the question was, of course, you can't really measure pastoral quality. Well, if the thing that you do have no measurable effect in the world, why are you doing it? And to know what to measure, we made another experiment. Imagine that you could clone the hospital, and so now we have 2 hospitals, and then we take the pastor out of one of it, and we run it for a year. What is the difference? That difference is the thing that we're going to measure. And I can tell you that just putting this up caused quite a stir, just to put up the pastoral quality, because the pastors used to own the hospital before. And now I was going to measure them. But our officer, Major Lawa, was very open to try to measure things like that. And again, we used our pirate code, and we visualized and measured in very simple ways. We mainly went after indicators. So this sign basically said, did you enjoy your stay at Rumah Sakit Bungsu? So that's how we tracked quality. So basically net promoter score. Would you promote this hospital to another one? So just an indicator. It was not quality. We did not measure quality. It was just an indicator of quality, rather. It was now time to start evolve how we did business. And really, without us really thinking about it, we just stumbled into it. Before we knew what to do, right? We need to bring in more money. But now, what's the next good action? It's really hard to say. How do you know when we're done enough? And this was also a very interesting point in time, because we now had another disaster. As it turned out, the prices we were using was not aligned with the public health price list. So we needed to lower our incomes. And the salaries, we were now paying people the full salary, but that adjusted every year, and we didn't do that, so we needed to increase our costs, and our profit went away. So now we were forced to become even better. And we did that by stumbling into, I don't know what to call it really, hypothesis-driven business. So this is our board, and I want to explain what we're having here. The first thing is APA, which is Indonesian for what, or Swedish for monkey, actually, which I found really funny every time I said that. So this is just a description of what we're trying to do, increase the number of patients, for example. The second column is KENAPA, why are we doing this? And a short rationale for why this is important now, yeah, we need to bring in more patients because we don't have enough money. The third column was really useful for us. That's the hypothesis. What do we think will happen if we take this action? What can we measure to see the progress of this thing? Is there a new measurement that needs to be done, or can we use the ones that we already have? For example, we might have a hypothesis that says increasing the number of operations per day will increase the total number of patients. And then instead of work here, we had experiments. What's the next little thing we could try to see if we are moving in the right direction? How would that look in our metrics? What would good look like? What would bad look like? And just being very concrete as we specified this in our task, we made our understanding much, much easier. And the shared understanding in the team was much better as well. So examples for this could be like advertise in other hospitals or go to local clinics, or even have other hospitals send their patients that are in queue to our operations and stuff like that. And we also tried to do this in 2-week iterations. So after 2 weeks, we could not continue doing this because then it would be too long, right? There's of course many more models around this that have been more thoroughly worked out, and I recommend that you check out Popcorn Flow by Claudio Perrone, or anything that Mike Burrows have to say around agenda shift. That's very interesting. The thing that I just described is what we stumbled in, and did we really stumble into it? Because we did not agree to this. We never shook on this, right? It said this is what we're going to do, but this is what we did. We evolved experimentally because we had to. Let me tell you the story when my client, my customer here, that was Dr. Lillian, the director of the hospital, when she really got this. She went up to the board, looked at the diagrams. Oh, sorry for the bad here. She looked at the diagrams and what we were doing, and then she said, well, from the last couple of weeks of data, we can see that our goal to try to increase the number of operations per day has not succeeded. So she erased that experiments columns, and she said to the management team, what do you want to try now? And I was so impressed. I just stand in the background smiling, because that's really a hypothesis-driven business in action there. This is what lean startup firms do. I wanted to end on a more personal note and tell you 2 more things that I think contributed here, and they are not directly Kanban related. First of all, I'm a Christian, of course, belonging to the Salvation Army Church, and I could, of course, have said that this was a miracle. And in some regard it was, but that would diminish the use of Kanban, right? If you need a miracle of God to get it to work. So I don't think that, I think that Kanban made a huge difference here. The way that we approached it, the way I could introduce them to the different practices little by little, the way we visualized, all of that. I have no more Kanban in me. This is everything I knew. But what was remarkable was the timing. The hospital had been on a downward trend for 5 years. We calculated afterwards, when we started to work with them, they were about 1 month from being bankrupt. That was the same time as I moved into a house that is 200 meters from the hospital. So that timing could not have been planned. You can call it what you want, but that was an amazingly good timing. I also want to relate one episode, without crying, I hope, about the last day. This is the last day. You can't see this on this picture, but my eyes are red because I've been crying a lot during this day. So we had a little meeting saying goodbye, and after this, the whole staff lined up and was hugging me on the way out. I kind of expected that because we had such a good cooperation. What I didn't expect was the thing that they whispered in my ear as we were hugging, because everyone was saying the same thing. And I'm sure that they didn't talk with each other before. And they were saying this: you were friendly. You wanted us to succeed. You didn't scream and yell even though we were bad. So I think that I brought that as well to the scene. Some kind of friendliness and love and cooperation and coaching mindset that they didn't have in their culture. They were expecting me to come there and just dish out some really angry comments and just get them to work. Why is this important? I've been out of Indonesia now for about 6 months. The hospital has broken every target I've set for them when I left. They are increasing their number of patients per day. The quality is through the roof compared to where they were. About 85% of the patients would recommend this hospital to another person. That would not have stuck if I just screamed at them and helped them to become better and then left. Then they would be on their own. So that's, I think, is a big differentiator as well. The things that I've talked about is just a fraction of all the things that happened during this period of time. And I'm actually writing a book about this. So you can, if you go to bit.ly Bungsu story, you could download your first free chapter there and follow on in the story. I hope to have that book out after the summer or something like that. It's mainly written, but it needs to be edited as well. So that will be pretty interesting, I hope. And with that, I thank you for listening, and I'm open for any questions. We had a question over here. Do we have a mic? Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Oh, sure. When you made the change with the general manager to give her kind of more power and authority and control, was there any resistance from her in having that authority, maybe due to cultural norms or the way business had been done? And the second question around that also is, did they have any issues prioritizing once you said, okay, let's prioritize and maybe only work on 2 or 3 things?
Yeah, so the first question was basically at that time, they were basically listening to me as just being the one that gave orders about how they were doing. So I suggested that, and my rationale behind it was that the management team should not concern themselves with that kind of thing. So she didn't have any problem, she was longing for doing that. And it actually turned out that she was like a raw leadership genius, because she just stepped forward, and we hadn't seen that before, but she just stepped forward and people like huddled around her. So that was just in her that we didn't had seen before. So she took the opportunity, and she was not afraid about that. However, I think that she would never have proposed that herself, because they don't do that in that culture. They don't speak up to authority in that way, especially if the authority is a religious authority. You would never do that. So I think it was important that we like highlighted that. And it also brushes on the other thing about prioritization, because prioritization at that in that instance, and in many Swedish firms that I've been, was done by this been long in the backlog, or we've been waiting for a long time for this, or I feel that this is important. You know about the HIPPO prioritization, highest paid person's opinion, right? That kind of prioritization. But now that was actually how we started on the track for getting this hypothesis-driven business, because I started to ask them about, what do you want to achieve? So you want to do this, okay, that's fine, but how can we see if that's success or not? And that actually brush for even bigger things, like vision for the hospital. This is the vision of the hospital, and they were always like very, very fluffy, and you could almost fit whatever into that. So I always try to ask them, can you give me one example of anything that we could measure to see if we're getting closer or further away? And that made it very concrete for them. So that's how we stumbled upon that. And also that helped us with the prioritization. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any more questions? Oh, one more.
So this one's a bit more like just a demand kind of question. What kind of services did you end up providing? Like I saw babies, I heard you talk about surgery. So what type of demand did you guys actually end up servicing?
Yeah, so basically they have like a focus area, which is mother and child for this hospital. So there's a lot of deliveries being done at the hospital. But then they were also a general hospital with, and it was not very big, right? We had, I think there are 70 beds in there right now. So they increased the capacity from 55 to 70 now. And now there's no more house. So now they have a real challenge if they want to be even bigger. But so it's a general hospital. But they also had a focus area of treating HIV patients, which is a big stigma in many of the underprivileged countries. And with our renovation, they actually ended up being able to make a separate part of the hospital for a HIV clinic. So you could enter that without going through the main lobby. And yeah, it was really good to keeping the stigma handling, right? So that was a new service that we ended up providing. But other than that, we didn't change the constitution of the services that we provided. It was the same before as after. But we were a little bit more crisp on what we actually did. And also, we played a little bit with how many operations should we do per day and stuff like that to like keep the hospital. It turned out that if we did many operations, that would render a lot of other services because the patient needed to be in our hospital for a couple of days and stuff like that. So that was a really good business for us, so to speak. So we started to focus more on that. So the mix was a little bit different, but we didn't end up with any new services. Oh, I want to emphasize one thing. This is not lean healthcare. Lean healthcare is something completely different than this. And I'm amazed about those people. I don't know much about this. This was me applying Kanban to a management problem, basically. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.